My name is Dave O'Brien, and I'm here with Bruce Peterson, the founder of Hidden Fence of Minnesota, and Courtney O'Brien.
Mm-hmm.
Bruce is my brother-in-law, Courtney's my daughter-in-law, so we're family business. But we are just going to do some, this is totally non-scripted. We have not rehearsed this. So I'm going to ask Bruce some questions because we want you to hear from his perspective. He is the longest standing dog fence dealer in the state of Minnesota, and probably arguably number 15 in the country or within the top 15 of dealers that do this. So that's a pretty remarkable accomplishment to be in the business that long.
It snuck up on me. It seems like we just got started yesterday, so it's hard to believe that it's 30 years. But
yeah, well, we've had a good time of it. So
definitely,
I started 9 years ago, and Courtney just came on here
Yep.
a year ago. So,
Yep.
So you've been doing this a long time, and Gentle Steps is our training method now with Pet Stop. But before that came along, what were some of the things that you were doing, particularly with dogs that maybe were a little bit more timid and things like that?
well, when we got started in 1992, pretty much all of the receivers out there had one setting, high.
Yeah.
And that was purposeful in a way. The theory back then was that you really kind of had to make an impression on the dog in order for something like this to work.
Sure.
And after about a year of being in the business, I was working with a manufacturer that was wanting me to do some testing on their receivers, and one of the things they told me that I needed to do was to put a 100K resistor on the collar between the two contacts to imitate the natural resistance that would be there with it being on a dog, because it's going to behave differently if it's on a dog versus if there's no load on the receiver. And upon doing that, I noticed that if I touched the contacts that there was no sensation, which got me thinking, well, if a 100K ohm resistor makes no sensation, I wonder what a 50K ohm resistor would do. And so I immediately went to Radio Shack and bought an entire assortment of different resistors in order to test this. So, and what I found out is that there was about 6 or 7 different values of receiver where we could make it from a very, very light correction, up to something stronger. And thus was kind of born the whole idea of kind of a progressive training where you start on a really light level and work the dog up. And we used that actually to do a kind of a fast training with a dog, a golden retriever that was very bright. And what we did is while we were installing the fence, we got the wire hooked up right away so we could train pretty quickly. And as I was doing the installation, I would do trainings on these lighter levels. And then we came back the next 2 or 3 days. And within a very short period of time, we had the dog trained. And with a very minimal amount of stress, not having to go right to the high level like we would normally have to do. And that was kind of the birth of that kind of Gentle Steps kind of process. It's not well documented, but it is kind of where that started. And then from there, it was just a matter of using those resistors on any product that we were using until the manufacturers caught up and actually started to build in that kind of programmability. And it surprised me that there was resistance to it. Again, the mindset of we have to make an impact on these dogs. It's a safety thing. So I was surprised that the idea wasn't embraced right away, but over 5, 10 years, 15 years, it started to become kind of the norm in the industry.
Well, and as Courtney and I are on the phone, what are we hearing from people? What is their number one concern?
They usually want to know, is it going to hurt the dog? Like, it's a
Right,
baby.
right, exactly. It is. The dogs they're like people's children,
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of ways. So it's always been my viewpoint of wanting to use less rather than more. The idea of testing each level and not skipping levels, because you never really know when a dog is going to respond or what level that's going to be.
Yep.
Also kind of discovered the fallacy of just because you're not seeing a reaction from the dog does not mean that they're not feeling something meaningful and that they're not learning, because people would tend to want to skip right to the point where they would start to see maybe the dog flinch or jump. And I would try to really tell people, you don't want to shoot for that right away. You want to give your dog 2-3 days of lighter levels before you start to look for some sort of physical reaction.
Sure.
Because they are learning a lot
Yeah.
in those trainings before you start to actually see the dog physically respond.
Sure.
So
Well, and we've put your statement in all of our emails now, or most of them, about the ridiculousness of the extended correction beyond the boundary.
Right.
I think that was a very well worded piece that we put in there, and if you could kind of comment on that for us, because Courtney and I, we deal with it every day on the phone, but we haven't had 30 years of experience of
Sure.
being around this. So
Sure. Well, it's really kind of really a troubling feature in my mind. For 3 decades plus, that kind of feature was not available on any kind of pet containment system of any brand. And success rates, 99% plus, in that time frame without that kind of a feature. And so it really kind of seems like it's more of a feature looking for a purpose, than a need that's, that a feature has been developed for.
Yeah.
And the idea of giving a dog a correction for 10 or 20 seconds or more, there's humane issues with that. In the past, that's been discussed by different manufacturers, and there are manufacturers like ours that allow up to a 6-second extended correction under controlled circumstances in the rare instances where that seems to be necessary to contain a dog.
Very key description there. Under certain, very limited circumstances.
And rare circumstances.
Yeah.
So to go from 6 seconds, which is in the end is a long time for a collar to be reacting, to going to 10 to 20 seconds or more is
as a norm.
As a norm, exactly, on all dogs. And the thing about it, us using something like that in a case-by-case basis is very different than, using it on all dogs with that. Mainly if a dog is out of the boundaries because they're not trained well enough. It's in the early stages, the first days and weeks of training. And so to give a 10 or 20 second or longer correction for a mistake where a dog doesn't understand what they're supposed to do is not helpful. In fact, in my opinion, it's actually hurtful, because an extended correction tends to bring a panic response, and a dog isn't really in a place of where they're receptive to learning, if they're panicking, because of something like that. The only case that we would use up to 6 seconds that we use is when we have a dog that we know has been trained to the boundary, knows the boundary, and they're just willfully taking the correction and crossing. Yeah. And even in those cases, we'll usually start with less than 6 seconds, 2 seconds or 4 seconds before using 6 seconds. And there is some effectiveness to it, which is why we utilize it. Yeah. But it's not for all dogs in all circumstances.
Yeah, we tell people it's maybe the 5 or even only 2% out there that are that stubborn.
And I don't think 2% is probably a better number for that. For us.
And you don't leave it on that setting, right? It's just till
we oftentimes will back it off. We won't take it off necessarily immediately, but after a few weeks or a couple of months, if the dog is contained. Once that habit is broken, because what we're doing here is it's conditioning. It's classical conditioning. Yeah. Where we're not trying to impose our will on the dog as much as train the dog to avoid that stimulation.
Mm-hmm. And you're referring to like a 2-second correction, because I don't think we've ever left a 6-second correction on a dog for months.
No, that would not be done.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
What's kind of okay, so it wasn't around for a long time for Boundaries Plus, but what would be kind of even the logic of why would they feel a need to create something like that? I don't know. It doesn't seem like there's a good reason to. So. Well,
in reality, there's only 2 reasons. One would be that the system's not effective without it. Okay. And I think it's very obvious that was not the case, because success rate on traditional fences is very, very high. 99+%, very much approaching 100%. Mm-hmm. The other option is that, this is a way for us to make our system look different than other systems, sure. Which, in the end, do you really want to deliver a 10 or 20 second correction just to make your system look different from others when it's not really necessary?
And I think we all know that the dog is not going to go out every day and do this and get zapped for 10 seconds. It's the accidental, you put the dog in the car, forget to take the collar off, and you back out of the driveway. Right. And when I tell that to people on the phone, almost all the time they say, yep, I've done that, or I could see myself doing that.
It happens.
It happens.
Yeah. And there's other circumstances too. Someone in the garage, they're sheetrocking and finishing the sheetrock in their garage. They take the transmitter off the wall. They hook the wires back up. They hook the wires up reverse polarity, and then the signal is inside the yard rather than outside the yard. Or your cable TV company comes in and they run their trencher through your twisted wire going out, and they patch it back together. Except they change the polarity on it without knowing that the polarity matters, and all of a sudden the signal is hot on the inside of the wire instead of on the outside of the wire.
Exactly.
Yep.
So my last question in this video is, I want to just, you've done this for 30 years. What are maybe a couple of things that you would want to let all of our potential customers know, just from the owner of the company, from your experience, just some things that you would want them to hear from you personally as they're considering doing business with us?
Sure. Well, it's always been my theory and my goal to use as little correction as possible to contain dogs. I know a number of other dealers around the country, different manufacturers, that will set their collars on all of their dogs at the highest or nearly the highest level, just as a security thing, figuring I don't want to have to deal with going back or having this customer contact me with a problem. And there are situations where that's appropriate. If you have a dog that lives on a busy highway or something, and one slip up could be disastrous, potentially, but it's always been our goal to use as little correction as possible, and therefore, the gentle steps works perfect for us, because you start on a low level, the lowest level, and you only increase as the dog shows the need for that, and then eventually getting to the point where the dog stays in the yard, and that's as much correction as is needed, and there's no need to go above that. So that's probably first and foremost. It's easy to kind of overlook the fact that we're using static charge here to train a dog, and it's not something that should be taken lightly. And so we do our very best to minimize that.
And I know that I'm the one who kind of hammers on customer service, but it's always been you from the beginning who've insisted on we're going to provide the best service we can to our customers, no matter what, even if it's to our own hurt. And we do that, and we see a lot of the reviews come through. So any thoughts on just kind of why you had that approach from the beginning?
Well, two reasons. I have what's known as a prohibitive conscience, which means that you always feel like you're potentially in trouble for something. It has a lot to do with my childhood. The other thing is that it's kind of interesting that when we first got started in the business, our competitors had already been in business for 10 or 15 years. And the attacks that would come our way, they don't know what they're doing, they provide lousy service, all of that, it really drove me, to we cannot slip up. We have to be Johnny on the spot at all times. And after 30 years, that's just become the way that we operate. But it mainly started from both of those situations of being afraid of doing a bad job or being in trouble, and also feeling like we could not make a single mistake because our competitors would be all over it.
Exactly.
So kind of worked against them in that.
Well, we're going to end this segment of the video. We might do another one here, but we just wanted to say thank you for stopping in here and talking with us, because I think our customers really appreciate seeing that you're still actively part of the business after 30 years.
Absolutely.
I mean, you still monitor the service line occasionally, nights, weekends, whatever, and return calls, and I think people are just blown away by that.
Sure. I don't dig as much, but I'm still involved.
All right. Thank you, and we'll see you on the next